This is SpaceX's Starship, a colossal steel beast incredibly powerful, and the first rocket in history that truly has the potential to carry humans off Earth and all the way to Mars. But don't let the shiny exterior fool you. Starship isn't some luxury space cruise liner. A mission to the Red Planet will push astronauts to the very edge of human endurance. The journey will be long, dangerous, unforgiving, and honestly, pretty brutal. So if Starship is really going to take people to Mars, what will that experience actually be like? A cozy home on Mars. Not quite try a cramped steel tube, where to stay alive, you'll have to drink your own recycled urine. Welcome to the no-compromise journey aboard Starship, and Space Now is taking you deep inside. At first, SpaceX promised that the entire upper section of the rocket, nearly 165 feet tall, would be fully dedicated to crew quarters and cargo, offering an open layout with up to 35,000 cubic feet of space, massive panoramic windows, and a sleek interior straight out of a Hollywood sci-fi movie. But things started to change once they began the first round of test flights. The early Starship prototypes kept exploding during landings. It was a relentless cycle of trial, error, and learning, classic Elon Musk, but it was also a critical phase that shaped the rocket's future design. One of the most important changes was relocating the auxiliary landing fuel tanks, moving them from the base of the rocket to the very tip of the nose cone. Why? Because during Starship's dramatic belly flip maneuver before touchdown, the bottom of the vehicle swings like a giant pendulum, not exactly the most stable place to store fuel. By shifting the tanks up to the top, SpaceX ensured the propellant stayed in a more stable position, significantly increasing the chances of a successful landing. But there was a trade-off. The entire nose section became off-limits for human occupancy. So much for the dream of a giant window to gaze out at the stars. And that wasn't the end of it. When SpaceX began launching Starship into orbit and bringing it back, the technical demands forced yet another major design change. The Starship V2, introduced in 2025, looked bigger on the outside, about 6.5 feet longer, but strangely, the inside was actually smaller. Cargo space was reduced to make room for extended propellant tanks that now reached farther up into the upper body. This gave Starship more fuel capacity, enough to lift itself and a payload of 220,000 pounds into Earth orbit without any refueling. In short, if we were heading to Mars aboard today's Starship, we'd be working with about 17,500 cubic feet of living space. Even though that number is just half of the original design, it's still far from small. For comparison, the International Space Station offers only about 32,000 cubic feet of interior volume, and that's spread across a tight maze-like layout. The ISS typically houses a crew of 7, and at one point even accommodated as many as 13 astronauts. So how many people could realistically live aboard Starship V2 for a multi-year round trip to Mars? Elon Musk has claimed that Starship can carry 100 people to Mars. But once you know what it's really like inside, would you still want to board it? Join Space Now as we uncover what no one else dares to say. The answer comes from a NASA study conducted in 2013. They concluded that for a mission lasting around 2.5 years, each crew member would require a minimum of 880 cubic feet of shared living space. That's not private space, just the bare minimum to function, roughly equivalent to the interior of a shipping container. Based on that standard, Starship V2 could reasonably support a crew of up to 20 people without driving anyone over the edge from claustrophobia. However, it's important to remember that habitable space isn't the same as cargo space. A Starship built for people needs floors, partitions, climate control systems, and a central shaft with ladders to move between levels, all of which take up valuable room. And that's not even counting essential storage for food, water, and waste recycling systems, things you simply can't live without on a deep space mission. The entire lower deck of Starship, the crew's home base, will be devoted to two mission-critical components, the cargo hold and the airlock. Because eventually, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be touching down on the surface of Mars. But that also means that the once generous 17,500 cubic feet of living space begins to shrink bit by bit into a tight, unforgiving nightmare. With a small crew, maybe 6 people, it's still workable. But if we're talking about colonizing Mars, that's nowhere near enough. And that's where Starship V3 comes in. The new version stretches to about 226 feet in length, roughly 56 feet longer than V2. But that added size comes at a cost more weight. And to compensate for that, the propellant tanks also need to grow. The result? Not all of that extra length can be turned into usable living space. Thanks to optimized improvements, the overall interior volume of Starship V3 has come remarkably close to the original ideal design, roughly 35,000 cubic feet of livable space. SpaceX kept its promise. It just took a few compromises along the way. Realism and optimism aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, it's often the balance between the two that propels humanity forward. Now that we've figured out where we'll be living on this journey to Mars, it's time to start building the internal layout. Starting with Deck 1, the very bottom of the ship, this area will serve as the cargo hold and airlock. In fact, SpaceX already has a working design from the Artemis program, the lunar landing mission, which uses a modified version of Starship, likely based on the V2. According to the design, the airlock is circular, with astronauts entering from above. This is also where the EVA suits will be stored. After suiting up, the crew will pass through into the unpressurized cargo bay, where exploration gear like mobility units, cameras, sample collection tools, and yes, an elevator will be located. That's right, because the ship's floor is elevated far above the Martian surface, a lift system is required to get astronauts safely down. Based on leaked SpaceX renderings, the elevator resembles a cross between an old industrial service lift and a shark cage. It's basic no frills, and that's a good thing. The last thing you want is for this system to fail in a hostile environment. Moving up to Deck 2, this is the logical spot for the first pressurized storage level. Here's why Starship must land vertically, and to keep its center of gravity as low as possible, the heaviest systems need to be placed on the lowest possible deck. That means water tanks, oxygen supplies, HVAC systems, food storage, and waste management. Everything heavy and vital goes here. Just like in nuclear submarines, a low center of mass is critical for maintaining balance in a pressurized environment. On Deck 3, we reach the most reasonable place to locate personal hygiene facilities. Placing them close to the storage deck minimizes the plumbing complexity. But don't expect anything luxurious. No hot water, no showers. The only way to stay clean will be sponge baths and dry shampoo. This is minimalism in its rawest form. But the real nightmare begins when we talk about waste recycling. Without a dedicated recycling system, just the water needed for a crew of 10 on a 900-day mission would weigh around 60,000 pounds. That's roughly 1/4 to 1/8 of Starship's total payload capacity just for carrying water. But with a proper recycling system, that number can drop to just 600 pounds. On the International Space Station, ISS, up to 93% of water is currently recycled. That means urine is filtered, purified, and reused. Solid waste is dehydrated, compressed into dry mass, and stored in the lower deck, while the moisture extracted from it is also returned to the water supply. In short, astronauts drink their own urine after thorough processing, of course. This is exactly what we signed up for: an unforgiving, cramped, and not-so-fragrant journey through deep space. 3 years, no hot showers, no personal space, no turning back. Are you ready? Space Now is here to take you inside the harsh reality of traveling to Mars. According to people familiar with the Starship lunar lander mock-up, SpaceX is developing rectangular hygiene pods that serve as both toilets and wash stations. These pods are positioned at an angle around the circular edge of the ship's interior to maximize use of available space, a layout reminiscent of the interior design found on Virginia-class submarines. This deck will also house the fitness area, a literal space gym. Concentrating all the unpleasant odors in one place might actually be a smart move. Each astronaut will need at least 2 hours of daily exercise to maintain cardiovascular health and muscle mass, a hard-earned lesson from ISS operations. Standard equipment will include stationary bikes, treadmills with restraint harnesses, and a full-body resistive training device similar to the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device ARED used on the ISS. Moving up to Deck 4, we enter the crew's primary living quarters. The remaining space will vary depending on how many people are on board. Starting with 35,000 cubic feet of raw volume, after accounting for walls, floors, and 2 decks of systems and storage, the actual living space shrinks to about 21,000 cubic feet. Can't quite picture that? Think of a typical suburban American home, about 2,300 square feet with 3 to 4 bedrooms. With that much space, you might assume it's fit for a family of 4. But, according to NASA, up to 24 people could live there with minimal psychological risk, at least on paper. That estimate aligns with what we've seen in Starship's moon lander design. SpaceX is developing a modular bunk system similar in structure to the hygiene pods. Of course, Elon Musk has confidently declared that Starship could carry 100 people to Mars in a single trip. In theory, that's not wrong, but in practice, being crammed into a sealed metal tube for 8 straight months in deep space sounds more like cruel and unusual punishment. The next level, Deck 5, will be the kitchen and dining area. But don't start dreaming about gourmet meals just yet. Cooking in space usually means pumping hot water into a bag of freeze-dried food and digging in. Still, there's some hope. Astronauts aboard the ISS get to eat pizza thanks to vacuum-sealed preservation and specialized heating systems. There's also a good chance that SpaceX will include a small-scale hydroponic garden inside the dining deck. NASA has already tested growing leafy greens in zero gravity, and the results are promising. You might not get vine-ripened tomatoes, but even a fresh bowl of lettuce in space can ease the homesickness for Earth. Deck 6 is where we start opening up the space a bit mentally and emotionally. With a 30-foot-wide interior subtracting insulation and wall structure, there's still room to create a dedicated lounge area, a place where humans can escape the feeling of being confined. Large-screen TVs, viewing windows, artwork on the walls, and even virtual reality systems will help relieve stress. Let's face it, you're never going to get 20 people to agree on what to watch, so personal VR headsets will probably be the way to go. Just remember, in zero gravity, you can float around freely. But once you land on Mars, gravity's back. That means we'll need proper seating tables and couches for the entire crew. Moving up to Deck 7, this space will serve as an office or workstation. Being away from Earth for nearly 3 years, you can't just lie around all day. As the old saying goes, an idle mind is the devil's workshop, and that holds true even in space. We'll need jobs, responsibilities, research data and systems to operate just like officers managing weapons systems aboard a Ford-class aircraft carrier. The highest level Deck 8 is the command center, or as Star Trek fans might say, the flight deck. This is where the business of flying Starship happens. Navigation, communications, landing control. It's all run from here. It's also where the crew will be strapped in during Starship's signature flip maneuver, transitioning from a horizontal belly flop to a vertical landing. This is one of the most dangerous and visually stunning phases of the entire mission. Assuming we survive the landing, we officially become Martian residents. And Starship, while not exactly spacious, will remain humanity's first outpost on the Red Planet. At least until Elon Musk's Mars City is up and running, and if you've made it this far, congratulations! Your work contract just went live. So do you think you have what it takes to survive 900 days aboard a spaceship in deep space? The journey to Mars won't be easy, but it's the future we're building. From red-hot steel to the dream of Mars, Starship stands as proof of humanity's unshakable desire to reach the stars. Support Space Now by subscribing and hitting the notification bell because every video brings you one step closer to the cosmos.